Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Billy Watson TV. It gives me great pleasure to have a returning guest on. It's his 7th time on the show. He's an excellent guest. He does many more podcasts about various topics. We're going to get into a few of them today. Welcome to the show again, Mike Williams, Mr. Sage of Quay. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Billy. Thank you so much for having me back.
That's cool. We had a wee bit of a mismatch there of times because I thought it was my clocks going back, but actually your clocks went back.
Right.
So mine's went back 9 days ago. It's crazy, this thing though about time, isn't it? I mean,
It's a conspiracy.
Basically, what do you think about all this? One time it's this, and then all of a sudden you get an extra hour in your bed, or you're up an hour early, and all of a sudden it's dark at a certain time and it wasn't. What's that doing with our brains and our kind of? Is it doing anything like fucking with us basically?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, they told us that the reason why they moved the clocks back in the fall and moved it ahead in the spring was to help the farmers out. Yeah. But I think that's a bunch of nonsense. Honestly, I wish they would just leave it alone.
Yeah, the time is the time, theoretically.
Right, exactly.
There's got the new Beatles song that's just appeared now and then. Sounds a bit like Jimmy Savile, now then.
Yeah.
And so there's a video to match that, and there's just, I noticed this during it, just at the start, it just comes up. I think there's a line about love or something like that, and it's got this. I noticed the 3-0 and the 3 and the 6. If that's standard on this type of thing, or obviously that's put there to tell us something.
Well, you see the -20 and the 10. That's 3. And then you move to the right, it's 3. Then you move to the right again, it's 3. And then you have 6. Yeah. So you have 3, 3, 3, and 6.
6 threes. Or 3 6s, sorry.
Yeah. So, is that coincidental? I don't know, but I will say this: after doing Beatles research for now 7.5 years, next year it will be 8 years, that whenever they put something up and they display it, especially when it has numbers, it means something. So in that example, we have the 369.
Yeah, I've got a few stills from the video and the song, but I just wondered what your impressions of it were, and the release of it, and maybe any dates. If you've came up with anything, have you looked into it?
Yeah. So the date it was released on November 2nd of 2023. So November 2nd, 2023, the numerology reduces to the number 11. If you use the date or you apply the date format as November 2nd, so November is 11, so 1 + 1 = 2. The second, 2. 2 + 2 is 4. So the month and the date together is 4. And then you have 2023. 2 + 2 + 3 is 7. 4 + 7 = 11. Now, another thing that they did, which is very clever, because they are very clever with their numbers, is if you take the year 2023 and you just write it out as 23, then you have November 2nd, 23. That's another date format. Well, that format is 9. So based upon the two date formats where you type out the entire date, 2023, that gets you to the number 11. Or if you abbreviate the year to 23, that gets you to 9. So the release of that song is a 9/11 encoded date.
Yep.
And the Beatles do this all the time. The Controllers do this all the time, where they encode certain events which they deem to be very important with regard to moving their ball forward, to moving closer to their agenda. As an example, I've done this example before. When the March 2020 event came about, we had coronavirus and COVID-19. Coronavirus has Pythagorean numerology of 11.
Right.
COVID-19 has Pythagorean numerology of 9. So coronavirus COVID-19 was an encoded 9/11 event. It's the same thing with Black Lives Matter. So Black Lives Matter, when you put it into the numerology calculator, you spell it out, it reduces to the number 11. So Black Lives Matter in Pythagorean numerology equals 11. Then we had the acronym BLM.
Yep.
If you put BLM into the numerology calculator, it sums to 9. So Black Lives Matter BLM was another 9/11 encoded event. And this goes on all the time.
So you can see why they would use this 9/11 in big events like Black Lives Matter is obviously a big thing, and even 9/11 itself was obviously done on that day. But this is just a release. Obviously, the Beatles have a big social impact, but right now, 2023, just putting out a song, you're still at it basically. The Beatles, do you think they still have that power? That what's the message here then? Why would this be an important thing to put this out at 9/11? Just putting a rubber stamp in the Beatles, the final release or something. It's almost trying to end it or something like that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on. So obviously what they want to do is they want to keep the Beatles relevant, especially to the boomer generation.
Yep.
And this is what I refer to as the ticker tape parade. I have said from the very beginning that Billy, as he rides out into the sunset, he's 86 this year. And as he rides out, they're going to rain all kinds of praise on him because from the perspective of the controllers, he's done an amazing job of moving this psychological operation that we know as the Beatles, moving it forward. And the Beatles are, they've made a huge impact on the
We're
culture.
not talking about the whole Paulism thing here. It's actually more than just the Beatles moving it forward. It's actually a new age.
It's a new age. That's right. We've talked about this. This is going into the age of Aquarius, or Crowley's Eon of Horus. And this is why I refer to the Beatles as the Pied Pipers of the Eon of Horus, because they had a major task in going from the old age, the age of Pisces, to the age of Aquarius, or what Crowley would refer to as the Eon of Osiris, which was the age of Pisces, to the new age, the Eon of Horus, or the age of Aquarius. And so they were the Pied Pipers from a musical perspective. That's why on the album cover of Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles are in multicolored outfits. So the word pied means multicolored. So they were the Pied Pipers. And, looking back at it now, what's happened is a lot of people can't see how important the Beatles were to the transformation of society and the culture because they've been around so long and they have been so assimilated and adopted into the cultural mindset that, people really, they can't distinguish anymore.
There was that time though. I mean, if you do a little bit of musical history research, I wasn't alive in the 60s, but obviously that era and the music that came out of it, I'm not that young, but I still look back in it. I mean, the Beatles, there was probably in lots of blues songs, references to Mary Jane and the Reefer and all this kind of stuff. But when Paul McCartney, Fall, whatever, he came out with that interview, basically saying, "Yeah, I've had LSD, and you're asking me, you're the one to blame. You're the media. You're creating the story." In some ways, that's true, but that was a deliberate act, I think, by the new Paul to basically get everybody out their minds on acid.
Yeah, it was basically what he was doing. What Billy was doing was taking the whole discussion about drugs, taking it out of the closet. There were, inferences and songs and stuff like that. There's no question about that. But they didn't want it to be something that you had to kind of figure out. Now they wanted it to be in the public domain.
Yeah. So Lucy
and they wanted it out there.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was obviously a big one with that because that's kind of undeniable.
Yeah, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. But Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is layered. So it's LSD, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, but it's also a reference to Lucifer. Lucy. So, many times Lucifer is referred to as Lucy. So we have at least two layers going on with that song. But, Billy was behind the Monterey Pop Festival with John Phillips. Maybe some folks don't know that.
Yep.
And with that festival, the CIA was involved and they told local law enforcement to stand down as they were distributing LSD at the concert because it was a CIA experiment, and to get LSD introduced into the public. So the Beatles were a huge transformation. If we go back to let's say the early 1960s, 1960, 61, 62, around there. Think about it, Billy. It was like a Leave It to Beaver culture and society here in the United States, at least, right? And by the time we get to 1969, we have Woodstock.
Yep.
Right. So right. So it's a big difference. So if we're talking 8 to 10 years, a decade tops, where this transition takes place. And the Beatles played a huge part in that transition, the entire British invasion.
Yeah, I've been just watching a little bit recently of the Rolling Stones. Obviously, they released this new album, Hackney Diamonds. It's got diamonds in it as well. I was going to mention the word diamonds, quite a Freemasonic number. I believe it goes to 33 as well. And yeah, it also means smash and grab. And Hackney Diamonds, like a smash and grab run.
Yeah.
On a window in a jewelry store. But yeah, what do you think of the Rolling Stones as well? This new album, just throw that out there just now. I don't know, the songs to me are like, do sound Stonesy, and they do sound like, but it's almost like too polished and too, it's something fake about it. And it's just like, I showed you the clip of Keith Richards trying to play on the Jimmy Fallon show, and it was obviously a guitarist backing him up, but they were making it out that he was doing it all. And, then they had the live show recently where apparently it was that band, kicking ass, and it seems to be able to do it. But, what do you think of the Stones? Are they capable of doing this music, writing these tracks? Is this purely their own work? Obviously, I think the producer had a large part. And I just put a video on Twitter recently, last night, where Trevor Horn basically is saying in the 80s, when the drum machines came out, basically you didn't need the band, or certainly the drummer, to come in. You can do it all without them. And there's something, although the Stones did do this gig, as I say, with these songs, I just can't. I'm a big Stones fan. Of playing them in the car the other day, all the classics, whatever, probably produced then as well, but it just seems something false about these guys coming up with this music and the age that they're at. And whereas Bob Dylan seems to be doing it a bit more, relevant to his age and still making music. What do you think about the whole Stones thing?
Well, first of all, I didn't listen to the new songs. I just don't have any desire to listen to it. But the Stones are no different than the Beatles and many of these other bands that came out of the British invasion. So you have to ask yourself, do you actually believe that a bunch of guys that are in their late 70s, into their 80s are writing these songs? I mean, they weren't writing them back in the 1960s. Tavistock had the songwriters that were writing the songs for the Beatles, the Stones, and so on.
You always wonder, because the quality of those songs they wrote back then, why can't they just keep it up and just pump them out forever, Like Van Morrison still does good work and still writes, he does, interesting things sometimes with cover songs, but he's still writing tracks and putting them out there that you think he is solely responsible for, the main songwriter. Whereas if they could do that then what happened? Why 18 years between albums and stuff like that?
Right. Well, there are those performers and band members that do write music. So that's another thing that, some people say, well, I'm saying that nobody writes their own music. And I'm not saying that at all. I write my own music. I'm just saying that when we take a look at the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the British invasion, that was completely manufactured. Okay. And in my research, I feel I have conclusively proved that the Beatles did not write all their own music, and they were not on all the recorded tracks. And the Rolling Stones were the doppelganger of the Beatles. I mean, the Stones were the bad boys of rock and roll. The Beatles were the good boys of rock and roll. And so Tavistock played them off of each other. And the reason why Tavistock does this is because they know that one band is not going to satisfy a majority of the tastes. So some people are going to be pulled in by the Beatles, like I was. Others are going to be pulled in by the Stones. Others by the Kinks. The Who. I
was listening to, I think it was Keith, and he was talking about Andrew Oldham and his importance, because he didn't manage the band originally. He kind of came in maybe after they just made the first couple of songs, something. So he had a massive part in, the Stones' image, and even things like "Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone?" and just creating the press, the bad boy image. So do you think because he sold his rights to Alan Klein down the line? Who is Alan Klein? Is he part of the Tavistock Institute? Who is Andrew Oldham? Is he part of it, or is he's just the guy that made them up to this level? These people that are coming in, are they controlled in the background by the Tavistock? Or are they just how it's happening, as they would say?
They're all interconnected. They're all interconnected. So, you've got Klein, who was part of the whole Jewish aspect of the Cabal. Okay. And there's no way that an Alan Klein could get his hands into something like the Beatles or the Stones or any other band without him being a player in the system. There's just no way. But in any case, going back to Alan Klein, he's part of that, right? I mean, with the Beatles, Brian Epstein was Jewish. We had Murray the K, who was their big advocate, their big mouthpiece here in the United States. He was Jewish. So there's a lot of Jewish influence around the Beatles. And, there was an article written by Joel Stein back in 2007, and I believe it was published in the Los Angeles Times. And it was an article which was discussing Jewish influence in Hollywood. And a lot of times there's denial of how much control the Jews have in Hollywood. But Joel Stein came forward with this article 16 years ago, and he said, yes, we control Hollywood. And Joel Stein, his position in this piece was, and I'm very happy and glad and proud that we do.
Well, if you look at the history, it's provable,
No, it's definitely provable.
There's just in the video, if you can see, there's 4 Beatles in the back there, and then he's the 5th Beatle, obviously. He's doing a wee wink at that part, and it's got, if you watch the video, it just has a wee smug smile to himself. Like, he's putting a clue out there, basically. Because it's quite blasé with it just now,
I found the entire music video, which was produced by Peter Jackson, to be very adolescent.
Was it very
childlike? It was almost like watching the Monkees.
All the stupid stuff, and
Yeah.
I don't know if actually John Lennon did do that clip and it's just exaggerating it, but the way they were doing it looked really false as well. But
they utilized CGI technology, and I think deep fake as well. Yeah. So and we'll get to that as far as this video and this song being a commercial for artificial intelligence. So we can talk about that, right?
It's this just when he's playing that body who just walked right across there.
Yeah.
Never seen the head, so it's like decapitated.
Decapitated, yep.
Aye. So
by the way, I don't know if that's Ringo Starr on the drums. I looked closely at it. Ringo looks like he's about 55, 60 there. And these days he has a perpetual tan. So it looks like he's going to a tanning booth. And so I have the clip from Mike Campbell talking about Ringo's double. This goes back a number of years ago.
Yeah.
Ringo couldn't make the session, so he sent his double. And evidently, what I was able to gather from the discussion that Mike Campbell was having, Mike Campbell was from Tom Petty's band, the Heartbreakers, is that his double is a drummer.
All right.
So apparently, he's sending his double off to make appearances, because Ringo now, I think he's in his 80s. He's 80, 81 years old. If you go back and take a look at Ringo from 10, 15 years ago in interviews, and you take a look at him now, he's gotten younger as time has gone on. So
Ringo's, I believe now, I think he's touring, his double's touring.
Yeah. Yes. Look, people are going to think I'm crazy. Okay. My mom is 88 years old. My wife's mother is 85 years old. Ringo is I think he's 81. Do we really think that an 81-year-old is jumping up and down on stage and swinging his body back and forth and then going up and drumming? Do you really think that that's happening?
Well, Mick Jagger's doing not too bad. I don't know how he's...
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know what the deal is with Jagger, because I saw the same thing with him. I watched a concert and he was I think he was in his early 70s to mid 70s. I watched him dash across the stage like he was like 25 years old. I mean, maybe it's the adrenochrome.
Or yeah, they get new blood and all that kind of stuff.
I can't speak for Jagger. We could say that maybe Jagger has a double as well. They all do. Okay. But with Ringo, because I spend a lot more time focused on the Beatles than I do with the Stones.
Yeah.
I look at this guy that I'm seeing in videos these days. There's no way
Was
that's an 81-year-old man.
During my time on the internet down the rabbit holes, there was one time there was this, I think it was Ringo's. She was saying it was Ringo's daughter, but she was saying like the original Ringo, and somehow she's saying the original Ringo's been replaced, and maybe as you say, multiple Ringos, and they just change them out. It's because it's just a role, really.
It's a role.
And yeah, I mean, you see that when you see people like George Clooney and stuff, or Bono. I mean, that's what you two are doing at this big theatre thing now, and I think it's Las Vegas, maybe.
Yeah,
the dome and all the subliminal programming. Again, you don't even need to dig deep. It's just like you slow it down. It's like God is bad or kill a cop, and
666 they were flashing. I saw that. There was a video I watched where somebody they got a hold of the footage and they were playing it in slow motion, and it's just unbelievable. It's all about mind control. It's about implanting subliminal thoughts into your mind. I do want to say one thing about Now and Then. So, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody else mention this. I mentioned it in a comment with a person that I had on my, actually, no, Peter had me on his show. I want to have Peter on my show, but Peter Tompkins, who has the channel PT Pop. And he gave a review of the song Now and Then. And he expressed the exact same thoughts that I had. I mean, just really, there was nothing inspired about it. It's not a good song. And so I was actually going to do a video on it. And then when Peter came out with his, I'm like, well, I don't have to do it now because I could just put his video up, and he's expressing my thoughts. But here's the thing. Here's a question, Billy, and for the audience as well. How is it that the greatest band in the world has no source unreleased studio recordings to work with? Why are songs lifted from cassette tapes that were recorded from boom boxes? So this is, I mean, think about this. So there were songs that the Beatles worked on in the studio. There has to be that were recorded. Maybe they are in draft mode that didn't get released because they decided, well, okay, we're just not going to go with that song. We have these over here. Okay, and this is what we're going to put on the album, or this is what we're going to release as a single.
Just an example, Bob Dylan's got all these things he keeps releasing of new stuff that's from the archives, and Neil Young's another one's got millions of them.
Right. So when you, as a musician, you know this, Billy, when you record songs, there are songs that you go in and record, and they don't make the light of day. They wind up sitting in a shelf somewhere, or on a shelf, I should say.
I suppose the thing, the Beatles just shot gold, and whatever they've done turned to magic.
Right. Whatever they touched turned to gold, and that's just that's more of the Cinderella story. That's not realistic. So that's something that we should question, and I find to be very suspect. That we have to go back to old cassette tapes in order to get
the song. Is this because I'm guessing they had a tape of John Lennon roughly singing the song, and then they've just done all the background stuff to make a new Beatles track? Or do you know the actual story about this one?
Yeah, I mean, it was a 1977 recording. It was a demo, and then
77. So John Lennon wasn't on it.
What's that?
No, he wasn't still alive in 77. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, he was still alive. I mean, but it's a very plodding song. So if you look, I put the original up on my community tab on my Beatles channel.
It's a John Lennon song, then, is it?
It's a John Lennon song.
Right.
The original is 5 minutes. It's John pounding on the piano, playing the piano, and just singing some lyrics. And it's not a very good song. Okay, right. That's my opinion. It's just not, and it's not just me saying this. Obviously, John didn't think so either because he never released it. It sat on a cassette tape, in a shoebox in a closet somewhere, or wherever the tapes are kept. And again, I asked the question, why is that? Why are cassette tapes recorded on boom boxes the only source for unreleased material? It doesn't make any sense to me, especially when you have a band like the Beatles. There should be plenty of unreleased tapes done in a studio that could be worked with, that could be revived. Okay, so just think about that. So I believe the story goes that originally they wanted to um, record the song back during the anthology days. And because of the lack of technology, like they didn't have the technology today that they had back then to extract out John's vocal. So they wound up doing Free as a Bird and Real Love. Well, two other songs, which, they're okay. They're not great songs. And we'll get to this in a moment too. Why is it that they're always focused on John Lennon unreleased material? What happened to George Harrison? You're going to tell me that George didn't or doesn't have, or he's passed away, so he didn't have unreleased material somewhere, either on studio tape or on cassettes at home himself? They don't pay attention to George's piece of this thing. They're always focused on John.
But was George not said himself that he didn't practice between albums and he just felt like making an album and he'd go in the studio? And,
right. He said he never practiced. He and Ringo never practiced. And the only time that he actually picked up the guitar to play is when he had to go into the studio. And I know there might be folks listening and saying, that can't be true. No, it is true, because George admitted it in an interview, that's exactly what he was doing. And in fact, in that interview, he said that there were times when he hadn't picked the guitar up in years. Do you remember that? Billy, I don't know if you remember that, but he said in years. So in any case, so they don't pay any attention to George's material. I mean, they're focused on John. And let me just pause for a second and explain why I think that might be. I think it's because they view John as a disciple of this new age, of this religion, this cult known as Paulism. Now, Billy is he's the Godhead between him and Paul as they reenact the Osiris Horus ritual. They look at them as the Godheads, but a Godhead has to have a preacher, right? It has to have a disciple. So if you go back to the Revolver album, you look at the back of the Revolver album, right? They all have sunglasses on. And who are they looking toward? They're looking toward John. And John has there's a light above his head, right? So there's a light above John. So John is illuminated. This is how I'm interpreting this. But there's a light behind John as well, which tells me that there's a source light. And John is a disciple of preaching about that source light. And that's why they've got these sunglasses on, because the illumination is so bright. But if you also take a look, you see the triangle?
Yeah.
And if we turn it this way, it almost looks like the triangle with the capstone.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing. And then we see this again. Again, folks, I'm giving you my interpretation. All right. If you don't agree, you don't agree. On the cover of Abbey Road, and we've got John in the front of the line, and he's dressed in white, representing, again, a disciple of the Godhead.
Even though he did
that's
that,
why I think they focus on John's songs.
But he did have that song. He doesn't believe in Beatles. Doesn't believe in,
right?
So he's kind of
the dream is over.
Yeah,
the dream is over. In fact, that's why on the ram is considered to be a very sacred animal in Jewish mysticism, in the Kabbalah. The pig is supposed to be unclean, dirty. That's why Billy on the Ram album, he's holding the ram. Yeah. So he's going back to Jewish mysticism. He's going back to the Egyptian mysteries. But on the Imagine album, we have John. I think he included the poster. Was it on the poster? I'm trying to remember the album cover. But in any case,
Album covers his head in the clouds, is it not?
he's holding. The album cover, if you turn it on its side, replicates the movie going back to Rosemary's Baby.
Okay.
Okay, look at the poster, the movie poster for Rosemary's Baby, where she's lying down, looking up, and take the imagined album cover and turn it this way, and
Okay.
John is in the exact same position. Okay, but there's also a picture or a poster of John, a postcard with John, where he's holding a pig, not a ram, but a pig, and he's dressed in kind of Billy clothing.
Right.
And what happened with John was going along with the program as far as Billy was concerned. And then there was a point in time where he decided that he didn't believe any of this stuff anymore. And so that was a direct punch in the face to Billy that, you're not some special being. You're not some godhead. You're not the reincarnation of Horus, Vishnu, or whatever. Okay, you're just a guy that's really gotten under my skin. So it's interesting, the symbolism that takes place. So going back, Billy, so the original demo was 5 minutes. 1977, my understanding is they tried to do something with it during Anthology. They couldn't because they didn't have the technology to extract the vocals. And then now they do because they connected with Peter Jackson. And there you go. Thank you so much. So the Ram album has Billy holding a ram. And then we've got John dressed in Billy clothing, grabbing the pig. This is when they were really going at each other. And we have the song "How Do You Sleep," which is the greatest Paul is Dead song of all time that John wrote. And if you read the memoirs of Billy Shears, everything that John sings about in that song, you will understand. Just a little reference point there. So it's not a great song. I didn't think it sounded like a Beatles song at all. In fact, even before I took a look at who was involved, I said, it sounds like Jeff Lynne has got his hands in it.
Right.
And guess what? Jeff Lynne has his hands in it.
He was quite involved in quite a few Beatles songs, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think Jeff Lynne was behind the scenes, many times, various times during the Beatle timeline. I didn't think the mix of the song was great. I thought the bass was muddy, which was interesting to me. The slide guitar work was very basic. I remember watching an interview before it was released where Billy was saying that, they're going to reenact George's slide guitar playing. They wanted to use some of George's slide playing, but for some reason they couldn't. I guess they couldn't extract it or whatever. So, they had somebody, whoever it was, trying to emulate it, and it's very uninspired, as well as the drumming. That the drumming was, very basic. There was nothing inspired about.
Why was it legacy by doing this then? What's first of all, when the Beatles put it out, you got all these people, oh, it's great, fantastic, we love it, regardless of what it is. So do you think it's just that'll do kind of thing? Surely they should be raising the bar or leaving this amazing legacy.
I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's perplexing to me because you would think that there has to be better songs that were recorded but unreleased in the archives. There has to be. But yet they're pulling out. Why are they pulling out cassettes? I don't know. So that brings us to maybe it's because they want to get people to embrace artificial intelligence, AI. So here we have an example of, we have this track from 1977. The vocal is mixed in with, it's recorded on a boombox with a piano. And so now, because of technology, because of AI, we're able to bring out John's voice. And not only did they bring out John's voice, but they improved it significantly.
Yeah.
Right. It went through all kinds of auto-tune to get it to make sure that it was right there. And it was the same thing with the video, right? We had a lot of CGI, looked like deep fake to me, going on in the video.
It fakeness from start to finish. It was quite disturbing to see it, actually. It's just like, they're not real people.
Yes.
No, right.
and I think, Billy, what they're doing is is to keep people in the past. It's to keep them in a state of romanticism about the Beatles and really not moving forward. Because, as you and I mentioned, the music video itself was very adolescent. It looked like a skit that the Monkees would have done.
Yeah.
And I think what they were doing was to bring people back into a childlike state. Oh, do you remember this? And when the Beatles came out, I have such fond memories. And then, of course, when you read the comments under either the song or the video, it's just unbelievable. You have people that are our age, just oozing all kinds of worship. I mean, it's so sugary and sappy. It's unbelievable. And
there's a lot of people still massively worshipping the God of the Beatles.
Yeah,
it's crazy. And like, I'm sometimes driving a van or whatever, and the CD player's not working, so I have to listen to the radio. I take my own CDs. Sometimes my CDs are stuck in the past, but that'll be my choice. But I do listen to new music as well. But on the radio these days, and for years, I'm so sick of hearing exactly the same songs day after day. It's usually 80s or whatever. It's just these songs, Teardrops, Womack and Womack, or Girls Just Want to Have Fun, or just endlessly repeating these things. And there is so much brilliant music out there that they could be talking about and promoting. And I'm sure these artists would give their music for free to be on the radio,
Yeah.
And it is just like keeping that humanity stuck. It's keeping them locked there.
Keeping them stuck in an era and keeping them there so that they don't break out. It's really, when you think about it, it's almost like encasing their head in a room, in a block of cement. And of course, we know that the music industry and the entertainment industry is completely controlled, and that means the airwaves too. What gets played on the radio is completely controlled.
I was listening to one of your interviews before doing the show just last night or something, and it just relayed that thing where there was only a few record companies, so the whole industry was majorly controlled at the start. I mean, right now, because of the internet, then people are getting their music out there, but that grip, the vice-like grip that they had on literally all music, I'm sure they had to tolerate some artists for their artistic temperament or whatever, but in the main, if they didn't like somebody or they weren't performing, they would just get rid of them, I'm guessing, unless it was particularly special.
The labels, I think, were the big ones at the time, RCA for sure.
Decca.
I think CBS was another, Columbia. EMI was connected into Capitol, or I should say Capitol was connected into EMI, which was the Beatles' mother label. Parlophone came in under EMI. The Beatles actually recorded on Parlophone in the early days.
And a lot of these would get sent to like America for finishing. I think Stones Exile Main Street recorded in the basement, and they've done this great album. But I believe a lot of the work for that went on, 6 months later when they got these rough tapes and they were put into some kind of, structure or whatever. And I'm sure they had the finishing school. I think that Bernard Purdy, he would go in and finish drum tracks and stuff you've talked about,
Yeah, Bernard fixed, he did the drum tracks on 21 Beatles songs in the early days between 63 and 66. He also said that he worked on, he was hired to fix some of the Tony Sheridan songs that the Beatles recorded on. And Bernard said that for the Beatle tracks, he did the drumming in Capitol Studios in the United States, I think in New York. So the tapes were sent over.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of folks really they don't connect the dots. They think that each one of these record labels is separate, and some of them are, as far as from a corporate perspective, functionally how they operate. But you have subsidiaries and you have mother companies, and they're interconnected. So Capitol, as an example, as I mentioned, came in under the EMI complex. So
I mean, the whole punk thing was the first time that people really started doing it for themselves, and then in the 80s there was lots of good indie labels like Creation and stuff like that, and great albums came out of that. But then eventually, because of the business world, they get taken over, like even YouTube, that was somewhere free to begin with, but now corporations move in and everything gets shut down and controlled again. So
well, punk was another genre that was created by Tavistock, because when you take a look at the word punk, if you look it up in a dictionary, it really talks about being a degenerate, a societal outcast. And so they created this genre. And then, like you said, Billy, then they have these quote independent labels that come up. And then what happens is these independent labels then get to a point where they are bought up by the larger companies. And this is by design. This happens all the time, by the way, in the corporate world. Right? Smaller companies are bought up because these smaller companies, what they're really doing is they're doing the grunt work. They're the ones that are doing the heavy lifting in the beginning. And so once it gets to a point where it's established, then the bigger companies just suck it up. So initially, I guess we could say that maybe these indie labels were organic, but the thing is, they're trying to be organic within a very controlled system.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
You had Mike Stock on. That was a good interview where he basically says it got too big and was shut down.
Yeah, Mike Stock essentially created a new genre of music. That's what he did, and that's a situation that is, really, it was out of the ordinary, because that typically did not happen. And as Mike explained, as he started to get traction, they put the kibosh on him, and they tried to tie him up with litigation. In the interview, Mike said, he spent a lot of money, trying to get what was owed to him, and battling with these with the establishment music business, the industry. They wouldn't play his songs, right?
Yep.
So Mike, Mike learned.
You got to number 41. Every track 41 or 42, you couldn't get in the top 40.
That's right. Mike said that, right? He said if you didn't make the top 40, all bets were off. That's where you had to be. So they made sure that they kept him below that mark.
You've changed the way that they counted up the votes or the record sales and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. So I have to have Mike back on the show again to talk about this stuff, because that was a really good interview. He's one of the good guys, let me tell you. Even on Twitter, he's out there, and he's not just doing music, but he's trying to wake people up. So I tip my hat to Mr. Stock.
I just noticed here a couple of things. I thought we'd get into this a wee bit. You showed the Abbey Road still or album, and that had the Volkswagen 28 If.
Yeah.
And then on this one here, it's got the Love Heart. And the reason I mention these things is because you had a guest recently that was talking about Billy's family and this whole thing to do with the Hamilton, or where there's a kind of new lead as to maybe where you think Billy's parents were.
The Douglas Hamilton and the Percy.
And going back to like the story with
the
father, and then the son James being the one that had Robert the Bruce's heart tied around him, and then that went into the, what do you call it, the coat of arms. Stars in the heart,
and the song "Heart of the Country"
comes down to Billy basically, and so the heart still shows up. And also, I thought as well as this one, when you look at the Apple album, there's an apple in the middle of the sleeve and the disc, the Apple logo. It's an apple cut in half.
Yeah,
it kind of looks a bit like a heart as well. The top of it,
Yeah, you know what it actually looks like? Hold on 1 second. I'll tell you what it looks like. People, a lot of people have probably not noticed this. Let me see if I can. Well, this is probably not the best example, but this is a stereo version, original version of Abbey Road. But take a look at it. It's actually a female part. If you take a look at the sliced apple.
Right.
Okay. Anybody who has Apple, it's going to be hard to see on this one. This is not the best example. I would take time to find one, but I don't want to hose you up here on time. So, folks, if you have
But
a
just
Beatle
look
album.
at it, and the top of it kind of looks like a heart. If you extended the bottom bit down,
Yeah.
just I don't know, maybe I don't know why
Yeah.
it's something like that.
Trust me, though. Trust me. If you look at this label, I know what you're saying, but if you look
Yeah.
at this label and get a good, copy, it's going to be difficult on this one. It's the female bottom half.
Right, interesting.
Okay. All right. So there's no question in my mind. It's very obvious. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
It's like these lots of church doors is actually, the Mother Mary's, like the clitoris has got, like, you go through a church, it's like entering into the womb.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
got the vaginal kind of entrance.
Right. Right.
So
Yep.
it's incredible what you see when you know to look for these things. It's like you walked around the West Coast to Edinburgh and you take the city for granted, and then you hear about Tartaria or stuff like that, and you go, "Hold on a minute, what's actually going on here?"
Hey, the other thing when you talked about Stacy's work on his family lineage, what she believes is his ancestry. His father's side of the family would be the Douglas Hamilton. So his father, she believes, is Douglas
So
Hamilton.
first
His
of all,
mother,
Douglas Hamilton was the first guy to first landowner or something to support William Wallace. Yeah.
yes,
And then he had a son, was the Arthur, I think, was it? Or James.
James.
Then he was the first lieutenant to Robert the Bruce.
Right. That's right. Right.
And so in that lineage coming down from there.
Yes, and his mother is the Percy line, which is a very powerful maternal bloodline, and the Percys do have some Campbell blood.
Right.
And in memoirs, Billy mentions that he does have Campbell relatives. All right. So now the other thing too, it would be Lord Douglas Hamilton. They were lords.
Yeah. Because
So now when we go,
like getting into lots of debt or something like that. Somebody offered them a title, and it was like getting £1 million in debt. But they took the
oh
title.
yeah. It was along the timeline there.
Right.
Property was passed to one of his ancestors, and it was $1 million in debt. And back in that day, that was an astronomical amount of money, right? But somehow, they were able to dig their way out of that hole. But when we think in terms of Stacy's work and saying that he comes from a family of lords, the line in A Day in a Life makes a lot of sense now. Nobody was really sure if he was from the House of Lords.
Okay, that's a good one, yeah.
Okay, so her research, in my mind, and I'll put the link down below, folks. I'll give it to Billy. Very compelling research. I know other people were looking into his bloodline, his ancestry. After I uploaded that presentation with Stacy, things kind of quieted down, and I don't know whether that's from others. I don't know whether that's because once they watched hers, they thought, well, I don't think mine is going to stack up. I don't know.
I got my Facebook account hacked, so I got a new Facebook profile. But my old one, there's a guy sending me messages, and he was sending me a lot of stuff to do with William Wallace and Paul McCartney and family tree lineages and all these pictures. And like, I asked him, look, you want to come on the show and describe all the stuff you're sending me? Because I don't know exactly what you're trying to say.
And he didn't do it.
No.
I know somebody like that too.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so there was a person that was doing the same thing with me, and I made multiple offers for them to come on the show to present their findings.
Yeah.
And no, everything was coming in piecemeal.
No.
And it was coming in, and okay, so it's piecemeal. So at some point you have to connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
You have to. So I don't know if it's the same person. I'm not going to say who it is. But in either case, like I said, I put the offer out there a number of times for them to come on the show.
Yeah, especially if they're saying something's wrong and this is it, right? Well, come on and tell the world, But
well, that's the thing, right? I mean, hey, look, there are people that are putting their research out there. Are they right? Are they wrong? Are they partly right, partly wrong? Look, the audience is going to have to decide. They'll have to do some additional research on their end. But here's the thing. They're coming out and talking about their research. They're putting it out there.
Yeah.
That's the difference between somebody that wants to be an armchair quarterback
Yeah.
and wants to throw stones from the sidelines, and somebody that actually goes out there and says, you know what, I might not have it all right, but I'm going to put it together. It's like the guy, John Black, that did the decode on the Volkswagen on Abbey Road, and I had some comments or people were saying, I don't think so. I think it's this. I think it's that. Doesn't matter what you think.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, maybe it matters to you, but, John stepped out and he said, hey, Mike, this is what I found. And at the very least, it's food for thought. And by the way, I thought it was very, very good because Billy is very much into anagrams and
Yeah.
puzzles. So that makes perfect sense to me, as did Stacy's, by the way, where, she decoded the plate as well.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that the plate doesn't have more than one meaning.
There's just one more thing we're going to get to about this score for Mark Lane's JFK film.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So let me go through that real quick. So, there's a hypothesis. I'll call it a hypothesis. It's not a theory, that Paul McCartney, biological Paul McCartney, was taken out because he was going to do the soundtrack to a Mark Lane movie, and Mark Lane is best known for his JFK conspiracy work, and saying that it was a government plot, and there was a whole lot more to it than just Lee Harvey Oswald. And there's a propensity out there for people to cling on to stories that make them, I guess, more comfortable or feel better as far as the how virtuous Paul McCartney was, at least in their mind, at least what they want to believe. And I'm not saying that Paul McCartney didn't have virtue. What I'm saying is nobody knows the man personally, right? You didn't grow up with him. You didn't go to lunch with him. You didn't go to school with him. You didn't hang out with him. You didn't drink beer with him. So what people have in their heads are fabricated stories and scenarios that they have created over time based upon what they want to believe. And so there's a lot of people that don't want to believe that Paul McCartney was in a mind control program, that I have suggested is very possible based upon the birdcage imagery, which is on the internet. It's easy to find. Birdcage imagery is or symbolism is Illuminati symbolism for mind control. Okay, so people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that his death could have been a ritual sacrifice. It has to be something along the lines where he was doing something really good and then he got taken out before he can do his good deed, right? So in any case, so I want to talk a little bit about Mark Lane, because people, they don't look into people, is what I want to say. So Mark Lane is a controversial character. Let's just say that there's the birdcage imagery, right? So birdcage imagery is Illuminati symbolism for mind control. So let me just take you through this, Billy, real quick. So Mark Lane, his real last name is Levin. So he's Jewish. He was a Jewish lawyer who was born in 1927 and he died May 10th of 2016. In 1951, Lane established a practice with Seymour Ostrow in East Harlem, that's in New York. Although Lane acquired a reputation as a, quote, defender of the poor and oppressed, Ostrow later asserted that Lane was, quote, motivated more by his ambition and quest for publicity than any dedication to a cause or concern for the interests of his clients. The partnership, meaning their law firm, dissolved in the late 1950s. So what we need to know about Mark Lane is the main protagonist involving the JFK conspiracy. So he was really front and center about the conspiracy, that it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald that acted alone, that there was an entire, cabal of conspiracists that were involved in the murder or the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Okay. So It was also at this timeline, we have to understand that the CIA coined the phrase conspiracy theorist. So the phrase conspiracy theorist goes back to the JFK assassination.
Yep.
Who was front and center with the conspiracy theory about the JFK assassination? It was Mark Lane.
Right.
He was also connected into, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know this, he was connected into Jim Jones.
Oh my God.
Okay. So in 1978, Lane began to represent the People's Temple. So this is Jim Jones. And the temple leader, Jim Jones, hired Lane and Donald Freed to help make the case of what is alleged to be a grand conspiracy by intelligence agencies against the People's Temple. Here's the kicker. Lane was present in Jonestown during the evening of November 18th, 1978, and witnessed or heard part of the events, claiming at least 408 lives. So here we have Mark Lane being the front man at the front of the parade for the JFK assassination, the conspiracy, right? And I'm not saying that he was wrong, but he's controlled opposition, right? I'm going to get to this. There are other researchers that have looked into him and said that, he was in military intelligence, he was with the CIA, and he was therefore controlled opposition. Lane also represented James Earl Ray, the person that is claimed to have assassinated Martin Luther King.
Really?
All right, so he's got JFK, Jonestown, and James Earl Ray, right? And he represented James Earl Ray, King's alleged assassin, before the House Select Committee on Assassinations during an inquiry in 1978. Okay, so we have this guy. He's got himself attached to very high-profile events, 2 assassinations, JFK, Martin Luther King, and then he's connected into Jim Jones. So he did 2 movies. He did Rush to Judgment and Executive Action. And he also wrote, I took a look on the internet, apparently 27 books. So he was very prolific.
Yeah.
2 movies, 27 books, and so on. Okay, now, I interviewed a guy going back a number of years ago, Rich Monroe, and he wrote a book about conspiracies. And during that interview, and I'll drop the link down below, and I'll give it to send it off to Billy as well, so he could put it in the description box. He worked for Mark Lane,
Right.
and he concluded that he was controlled opposition. And I asked Rich during that interview if Lane ever discussed his movie and Paul McCartney doing the soundtrack. And Rich said no. He never heard any discussion about Mark Lane talking about Paul McCartney doing the soundtrack for his movie. Okay, so go. Let me just read to you. So somebody wrote me and was asking about this because there's a trope out there about this whole Mark Lane thing, and this is how Paul McCartney got himself in hot water.
When we talk Paul McCartney, what era is this?
This is 1966. Is I'll get to this. So in 1966 is when Mark Lane allegedly had this conversation with Paul McCartney about doing the soundtrack for his movie, and that's what I'm going to talk about now.
Because I know Paul McCartney was asking, or he was saying something about JFK, that he didn't act alone or something like that. Is that right?
That's the story, right? That's the story. The thing is, I have no knowledge of Paul McCartney in an interview discussing it.
That's true. It's just kind of hearsay.
Right?
Yeah.
And also, we have never heard Billy, as Paul McCartney, ever talk about this alleged
soundtrack,
working to this collaboration or soundtrack with Mark Lane, which I find very interesting because the JFK assassination is not something that's just, it's not a minor thing.
Yeah.
So I've never heard Paul McCartney talk about it when he was alive, biological Paul McCartney. If somebody has an interview where he does discuss it, please send it along. And I've never heard Billy ever talk about it, ever. Okay, so somebody wrote me, and this is what I wrote. So this is my take on it, because people have asked me, what do you think about this? I said, I seriously doubt the Mark Lane McCartney theory contains any truth. Lane, according to researchers like Christopher Bolan, was controlled opposition. He worked for military intelligence and was a CIA operative, according to these other researchers. Many people don't know he was intertwined in the Jim Jones Jamestown massacre, which was a CIA cult endeavor. The story about JPM, or Paul McCartney's involvement in Lane's movie, comes from Lane. In his book, Citizen's Descent, he claims to have met JPM at a cocktail party, which led to a discussion about the JFK assassination and Paul asking to read the manuscript to his movie.
Yeah.
After JPM allegedly read the manuscript, Lane tells us he suggested McCartney write the music score, which Paul agreed to do. But later on, Lane decided the film was better off with a, quote, stark and didactic vibe without music. Okay,
Right.
so he meets Paul at a cocktail party, talks to him about the manuscript. Paul wants to read the manuscript. He reads it, gets back to him after several days, and says, yeah, I can write the score to this movie. But then Lane decides that the film is better off without music. So we have to say to ourselves, or have to ask ourselves, so hold on here. So he's got supposedly the biggest name in entertainment at the time in 1966 to back his endeavor and to write the musical score, to put the soundtrack together. And then he decides, I'm not going to do that. So on one hand, he wants to have all his attention put on his film so that he can get his message out about the conspiracy around the JFK assassination. But he doesn't want to bring Paul McCartney's soundtrack into the movie. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No.
And of course, this whole discussion is predicated on the fact that Paul McCartney is actually writing music, that he is actually writing music with John Lennon, which, for those of you who know my work, that wasn't happening. Yeah. I don't believe he or John Lennon or George Harrison wrote anything between 1962 and 1966. Okay, so that's problem number one for me. I believe it's a contrived storyline by Lane. Also, the book was published in 1968, 2 years after Paul was gone, which was very convenient. If Lane was a CIA operative, he would have known that Paul departed back in 1966. In other words, he knew that he had died, right, in 66. So in 1968, 2 years later, you can come out and say, I had this conversation with him.
But then again, if he says that Billy Shears is still around, surely he would say, no, we didn't.
Right. So, but we don't never hear Billy talk about it. I've never heard Billy talk about Mark Lane, the JFK assassination, none of that, right? So, and I am unaware of Billy, as Paul, ever being asked about working with Lane. You would think at some point over the timeline, Billy, as Paul, would have been asked about something like his involvement with the JFK conspiracy.
You would have thought.
Especially with a character like Mark Lane. And then I go on to say that last I interviewed a guy a few years back that worked with Lane. He told me that Lane was a gatekeeper. My guest also talked about Lane's weird involvement with Jonestown. I asked the guy, the person that I interviewed, which was Rich Monroe, about the McCartney story, and he said he had never heard Lane discuss any collaboration involving Paul McCartney. So I told my friend that this was my take on Mark Lane. I believe he helped to concoct a CIA conspiracy theory with as controlled opposition with JFK, and also one in a theory including one around Paul's death that has lived on for almost 60 years now. So here's another interesting thing, and I'll wrap up with this, Billy. There's two different versions of this story, believe it or not. One has Lane asking Paul about writing the score, and the other had Paul offering to write the score without Lane asking. So there's two different versions of the story out there, and I'll drop a link down below, and I'll give it to Billy on the other story, where it's Paul offering to score the soundtrack without Lane asking. In the alternate version, where Paul offers his desire to score the movie, the story has it that Lane is with Paul McCartney in, I guess, Paul McCartney's apartment, and he's playing the beginnings of a song that he was working on, and he plays it for Lane. And that song was Eleanor Rigby. Okay, so here's the problem, all right? Paul McCartney didn't write Eleanor Rigby. That song was written either by George Martin, Theodore Adorno, or some other crack ghostwriter that was on the team for writing the Beatles music between 62, 66, and also from 66 to 1970. But in any case, I hope that made some sense. So the bottom line is that Mark Lane, he's a controversial character. There's a sketchiness about the things that he was involved in. And so the whole story, when you read about it, it seems very contrived to me. Now, did he meet Paul McCartney? Maybe he met Paul McCartney. But certainly Paul McCartney was not going to be writing a soundtrack or scoring his movie, because Paul McCartney wasn't,
So you think
a
this
songwriter.
He's just put the story out there, and that's it. Basically, there's no substance behind it, and people have latched
That's
onto
what I see. I see a story that was put out there, in 1968. Paul McCartney's gone because he died in late 66. Pick your date: August, September, November. And so, who was going to argue the story? I don't know. But then again, like I said, we don't ever hear Billy, who's playing Paul McCartney, ever talk about this. So I don't know. The whole thing seems very contrived to me. And personally, I put zero stock in that explanation as to why Paul McCartney died.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, what do you think Paul's end? Do you think his demise is coming soon? Do you think he's wrapping things up?
Billy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Billy's 86 years old. So Now and Then, the title of the song itself, Now and Then, is another segue, to, I think it's another clue that his runway is very short. And how short, I don't know. It could be next week. It could be when he's 90. He likes the nines. I've always said that 90 was probably the date, like Chuck Berry. But who knows,
I've seen something the other day. I think he's saying that, why should he stop playing? He's going to play till he drops, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's because, he made a deal with the chief commander, right? That's the chief commander telling him you're not going to stop playing until you can't play anymore. It's the same thing with Ringo.
Yeah, you just see Billy. He is looking a bit, his years are catching up with him, kind of thing. And
Yeah. Even when you hear Ringo speak, like when you hear Ringo speaking, when he was doing they were doing the little mini documentary before the song was released. If you listen to Ringo's voice, it sounds very old.
Yeah.
Very old. And so I believe that is him speaking.
Right.
But how can that then be the guy that's on stage with the all-star band singing and running around the stage and jumping up and down, doing jumping jacks and going up and down, playing the drums? Somebody's asking about Ringo spilling the beans. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Ringo's not going to spill the beans.
I think, what was it, the guy in Wings, Denny Laine, he was quite the closest, I think, to somebody. He was alluding to Billy Shepherd and stuff like that, wasn't he? Oh,
Denny's a longtime friend of Billy's. It goes back to the days with the Diplomats. And interesting enough, I don't know if you saw this post, but Denny is very sick, and he has a GoFundMe to raise $100,000 because he doesn't have any health insurance.
Right.
And he got remarried, and he lives in Florida. And I put a post up. My immediate thought was, nobody has to do anything that they don't feel compelled to do. Okay. But my thought was this: Billy can't write a check for $100,000 so that this guy, so his buddy going back to, whenever,
this is true. Yeah.
Can have his operation or have his medical treatments. I don't know. Maybe Billy did offer. I don't know. It just seems odd that that post went up.
Maybe you should say full expose and McCartney donate here.
I know he was very pissed at Billy when the Wings tour in Japan got canceled, because when Billy packed the weed in his suitcase and then he wound up in a Japanese prison for 9 days. Well, the entire band was out of paycheck because of that.
Yeah.
Because of Billy's, selfishness. And in the book and memoirs, he tells us that, Denny was very, very angry with him for that.
Yep, but I guess at that time he thought he could do anything. He was untouchable.
Yeah, that's what he said in the book. He said that, he felt like hey, I'm Paul McCartney, could do whatever I want, and he winds up in jail for 9 days, right? There's the number 9 again. In 1980. So, 1980 is reduces to 9 as well.
But that again exposed the whole thing that he wasn't the original Paul McCartney because of the fingerprints that they had originally didn't match the ones of him.
That's right. Yeah, that's the situation that got him in a bind, because the original Paul had his fingerprints taken when he and Pete Best lit a condom on fire. They nailed it to, I guess, the side of a building. They lit it on fire.
Right.
And so, the police were called. It was in Germany. And so he got arrested, he and Pete, I think it was Pete. And his fingerprints were taken. So his fingerprints are now with Interpol.
Right.
So when Billy got arrested for carrying, all that weed into Japan, they took his fingerprints again.
Right.
And then when they did the comparison, they were like, well, these fingerprints don't, who are you?
And somebody makes a phone call, just let him go.
Yeah, that's what happened, right? So they wind up making a phone call over back to the UK, like, oh, yeah, he's our guy. Just let him go.
His fingerprints changed, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mike, it's been a pleasure having you on again. Thanks very much for your time. And anything you'd like to say to wrap up, to send people to your stuff or anything?
Yeah, just go to my hub website, folks. Sage of Quay, SAGEOFQUAY.com. All my links are there. I want to thank Billy. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Billy. I know this was really all over the place, but it was good. It was good because I like when we could just talk about stuff. And what I might do is break this up into 2 videos. Maybe I'll do one for my Paul is Dead channel where I'll extract out the Beatles stuff.
Yeah.
And the rest of it will go on to my main channel. Hopefully YouTube doesn't bounce it. I don't know. I hope they don't.
YouTube are going into my archives these days and digging up things. Every day I'm getting 4 videos of
me too.
And then they've said to me, oh, we've got put somebody on your case and now we've demonetized your channel. I wasn't monetizing anything anyway, but they're going in the archives, digging stuff up and saying, now we're demonetizing you. You're just punishing anyone that wants to speak any kind of truth.
I had 2 videos that were 8 or 9 years old. And they sent me an email. This violates our community guidelines. I'm thinking to myself, it took you 9 years to find that. And so what I do is I repost them up on Rumble and BitChute, and it gives those interviews, those shows, another life.
Yeah. And
in fact, one of them got like something like 1,000 views because I did it back in 2014 to 2015. And I put it up on Rumble, and it's standing at 25,000 views right now.
Right.
So I had 25 times the views.
Yeah.
That's YouTube is stupid. If they would just leave things alone, especially really old stuff, because nobody's watching it anymore. Exactly, yeah. You and I have forgotten that we did the shows.
Nobody cares. Nobody's watching it. They're just
nobody cares.
Robots, obviously, finding little word. You said virus at 8 minutes, 37 seconds.
Right. So, in any case, so look, thank you again, Billy, for having me on the show, and it's always a pleasure.
That's cool, man. Welcome back anytime. Everyone else, thanks very much for watching, and I'm with Craig Campbell on the 14th at 7 o'clock, so tune in then. In the meantime, cheers and out. Bye-bye.